Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mary Kay Devine, Director of Community Initiatives here at Women Employed. I'm joined by Carrie Thomas, the Associate Director of the Chicago Jobs Council. And thank you so much for logging on to today's conversation. Let's Talk Advocacy, Prioritizing Adult Learners for Policy Action. We really look forward to discussing advocacy with all of you and working with you to figure out ways we prioritize adult learners for policy action. So, like usual, before we dive into today's meeting agenda, I'm just going to review a few brief webinar housekeeping items with you. So during the presentations, your phone lines will be muted. We do have a full agenda today, but we're actually going to break it up into some pretty distinct parts of Carrie and I will bounce back and forth and just do brief presentations. We're going to have a conversation with Jennifer Foster from the Illinois Community College Board, who will introduce properly at that point and have a short discussion with Jennifer about the policy landscape at the federal and state level. We're going to have a few interactive polls where we really are interested to hear your feedback and thoughts and ideas on different things. And then at that point, we're going to open up the phone lines and unmute everyone. And I'll give you some further instructions on how you can mute your own phone line if you're someplace noisy. So as you heard when you entered, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to the webinar recording and slides that we host on our Women Employed YouTube channel. And if you need technical help or support, our webinar provider, ReadyTalk, is fantastic, and I put their number in the chat window that you should be able to see along the side. Oh, Betsy Rubin just asked, do I have a Twitter hashtag? No, funny you ask, Betsy Rubin. We just did our first Twitter storm here at Women Employed yesterday on the theme of college affordability, but my brain can only handle one platform at a time. So right now I'm going to do the webinar. I'm going to do the webinar, and then maybe in some future webinar we will include a hashtag and storm Twitter again. So thank you. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Carrie Thomas.
Thanks, Mary Kay. Hello, everyone. We want to start today's conversation, as we usually do with our webinars, with the urgent need we have in Illinois to improve adult transitions into college and careers. And then I'll take a few minutes just to tell you a little bit again about the Pathways to Careers Network. But the most important thing that grounds all of this is that by 2020, 67% of jobs in Illinois will require a college degree or some kind of post-secondary certificate or credential. But we have about 3 million adults in Illinois who don't have any education beyond high school. And what this means for our economy is that out of 100 future jobs, it is possible that 24 could go unfilled. These facts are what drove Women Employed and CJC to launch the Pathways to Careers Network a couple of years ago. So our goal is to increase college and career success for adult learners with low basic skills. And that advances the mission of both of our organizations. So for 40 years, Women Employed has been mobilizing people and organizations to expand educational and employment opportunities for America's working women. And for over 30 years, CJC has worked with its members to ensure access to employment and career advancement opportunities for people living in poverty.
And one of the usual activities we do to open up our webinars is just to check your membership status. We'd love to keep everybody informed, so if you don't think you're signed up yet, or if you're already on the list, just let us know. And we send out to all of our Pathways to Careers Network members just timely news and information. We have a Blackboard newsletter that communicates education and workforce training development news. We also invite people to webinars and conference calls like this. Great. Thanks. I think you are already on the list. Thanks, everybody. So today's meeting, we have one big goal, and we're really looking to develop a state-level policy agenda that will align as well as advance the federal career pathway policy. In a minute, Carrie's going to give a brief snapshot on all of the various opportunities that we're seeing at the federal level. And so we're really trying to figure out, how do we leverage those opportunities to develop and advance a state-level policy. During today's meeting, we're going to really cover 3 areas. Review the federal policies, as I mentioned, and Carrie will walk us through what we're seeing at the Department of Education, Department of Labor, and Health and Human Services, and how those various departments and administrations are working together, and the opportunities that they lend us here in Illinois. We're going to work together, and this will be a really interactive part of our conversation today on identifying key messages, discussing effective messengers, and determining what are potential policy levers, or in other words, what are the leverage points that we have here in Illinois to elevate our adult learner policy agenda. And finally, we want to make sure before we close today that we discuss some specific next steps for finalizing, circulating, and elevating our policy agenda. And we're really interested to hear what role you want to play as Pathways to Careers Network members.
Great, Mary Kay. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of remind everybody on the call of kind of where we've come over the last 6 or 7 months. So we've done a lot to document and collect information from many of you in the field. And one of the main ways that we did this was to respond to the Office of Career and Technical and Adult Education's request for people to give input for their National Action Plan. And if you recall, this report came out in the late fall, that showed that we have 36 million adults in the country that have very low skills and aren't ready yet to get training, and we need to really address that problem. And OCTAE has been working on developing a national action plan. So really in this process, Illinois has been really instrumental in providing information. So there were actually 4 opportunities that I know of where people in Illinois got together to give information to OCTAE, and 2 of them were ones that the Pathways to Careers Network hosted, and you were likely involved in. And based on the input that we got from you, we submitted information to OCTAE, and listed on the slide here are the 4 themes that we kind of organized information around, and at the bottom of the slide is actually the link to the summary information that we sent to OCTAE. But a couple of things I just wanted to note. So around engaging employers, we heard a lot from people about focusing on small and medium-sized employers, and also really thinking about providing paid work opportunities as part of career pathway strategies. Around priority groups, there's really a sense that at OCTAE that they want some guidance about how to prioritize groups, and I think that everybody here in Illinois understands and sympathizes with that need because there's limited resources, but people were very hard-pressed to pick any particular subgroup that needs to be focused on because there's such a huge demand for adult education and career pathway services. Scaling best practices, I will say that there were several good examples that were pointed to and came out of both of the input sessions that we did, but in addition, we shared all the great work that's happened over the last 5 or 6 years here in Illinois. So the Illinois Community College Board's Guide to Developing Bridge Programs, the 3 precursor guides that came from Women Employed, from Instituto, from DCO around spending, using your WIA Title I money. We also shared information about bridge programs that exist. So there's a bridge directory, and the local workforce board here did a bridge report on community-based bridge programs, so we submitted all of those. And then we had some great examples of how colleges are improving the quality of instruction that we shared as well, and a bunch of that information came from city colleges. So I think it's just really important to recognize that the practitioners in this state and in this region are really leading the way in some of these national conversations. And in fact, just yesterday, somebody said to me that really so much has come from Illinois, so from a federal national organization said so much is coming from Illinois that as we really need to celebrate a lot of the national success with people here in this state. So I wanted to recognize that. So now I also wanted to point out that the OCTAE opportunity isn't the only one. So OCTAE did release a very initial overview of what the National Action Plan is going to focus on. There are 7 strategies that they're going to be focusing on, including aligning federal policy and programs to integrate services for adults, increasing the return on investment for businesses, and then also committing to closing the equity gap for vulnerable adult populations. So So those are 3 of the 7 strategies that they will focus on when their final full plan comes out in August. So we will be keeping everybody apprised of when that plan gets released and what's in it and kind of next steps out of that plan. But in addition, there are 2 other things that have happened in the last, I guess, month or so, maybe 2 months at the national level, which is also are all about career pathways. So career pathways has a kind of a central role in a lot of these federal conversations. So one is that there has been a bicameral, bipartisan proposal that was released about 2 weeks ago to reauthorize the Workforce Investment Act. And we expect that this is going to be the reauthorization. The worst case scenarios around reauthorization did not happen, so consolidating titles didn't really happen. Eliminating lots and lots of programs didn't happen. They did eliminate 15 different federal programs, although at least 4 of them are programs that haven't had funding for a number of years. But career pathways is really a best practice. Transition to post-secondary is a focus in the proposal, and there's a lot of policy around aligning planning and performance outcomes across federal programs. So that is going to be another opportunity. The earliest that could happen, get passed by Congress, would be this summer, and there would be some kind of implementation period, a year or so. So that would be a great opportunity for all of us to be working with the state agencies around policy and planning and priorities for Illinois. Then lastly, many of you have heard about some of the cross-federal agency work across the Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration, OCTAE at the Department of Education, and then the Administration for Children and Families at Health and Human Services, and ACF is where the TANF program is, and the TANF program. So they just released a request for information around career pathways, and so this was yet another opportunity for us all to contribute the great ideas. It was easy for us at CJC to contribute some ideas because we looked back on what we had heard in the OCTAE input sessions and what we've heard in other work that CJC does, and we kind of ran that up the flagpole again. But they are planning to use that information for funding decisions and funding opportunities, as well as some cross-agency work. And potentially legislative strategies. We are not necessarily holding out hope for any big legislative changes after the reauthorization, but I think it's really important to recognize we have huge opportunities at the federal level, and I think we feel like our job now is to make sure that Illinois is in the best possible position to take advantage of these. And so having kind of a policy agenda and a policy focus for our state will really be important for us to take advantage of what happens at the national level. So now we're going to turn to a discussion. So our guest today for this discussion is Jennifer Foster, who's the Associate Vice President for Adult Education and Workforce Development at the Illinois Community College Board. So Jennifer, for this portion, I know you're on the phone, if you could hit *7, and that will unmute your line. And when you do that, if you could just say hello, and we'll know that you're there and get started. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So in this discussion today, folks will see on the slide, kind of these are the general kind of questions we wanted Jennifer to respond to. But Jennifer, I know you have been actively involved with with leaders from other states around the National Action Plan and what's happening at OCTAE. So I wonder if you could give us your perspective on those opportunities at the federal level and how you see Illinois' opportunities there.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me as a part of the discussions today. I think that just listening to your overview and some of the plans that you've submitted, it really focuses in on everything that at the national level that has gone on over these last few months. There have been a lot of activities that have happened, and you've mentioned the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, replacing the WIA Act. What I'm seeing in terms of leveraging the momentum is that we have the opportunity to make sure that we're connecting with all federal programs across at the federal level. You mentioned the work that has been going on between the Human Services area, Education, and also the Department of Labor. And that truly, I think, remains a focus. One of the things at the national level, the state directors for adult education are trying to make sure that we are connected with the other arms, particularly career and technical education, the Department of Labor, because what we see is that if we band together, we will probably have more strength in terms of leveraging some of the things that are going on. As most of you have seen in grants that have been out at this point, the TACT grant, there is lots of information in there about adult career pathways and making sure that we're targeting the adult learner population as we see here in Illinois. I think what we will continue to see in the future and what we can expect is that there will be an increase in the communication about adult learners, and we will also see an increase in a lot of the federal grant opportunities where adult learners are an integral part of the process. This is something that over the past, I would say, probably 5 years that we've been working towards, is to make sure that the adult learner is not forgotten. And so I think that in terms of the momentum that we're seeing at the federal level is that there's more interaction between all of the federal partners. The state directors are interacting with the state CTE directors and so forth. And so the more that we can push in terms of adult learners being at the table and our programs that are representing our adult learners and our advocacy groups, making sure that we're at the table to continue those discussions. I can see in the next, especially with the WIA or the WIOA legislation, there's lots of emphasis on career pathways. There will be some common performance measures that we're going to have to meet. The Unified State Plan is definitely something that will bring us all together. So having one plan, as we've submitted our one plan to OCTAE, it's that joint thing that's going to ensure that we have all of the pieces together. And it will make, at the local levels, it will make it a whole lot easier hopefully it will make it a lot easier for our local programs to interact with our Title I partners and other partners, human services as well.
Thank you. Is there anything that you, just in reflecting on these opportunities, is there anything that you think we need to do differently in Illinois to be in a better position to take advantage of these opportunities? Maybe something that you've heard that other states have done, and I think some of us are really interested in hearing whether there's some things on the Title I or workforce side or the human services side that we could be thinking about related to adult learners that would make a difference.
Well, I think the one thing would be we have to better communicate what it is that we're doing here in Illinois. I heard you saying earlier that Illinois we are contributing a lot in terms of this whole career pathway discussion at the national level, but I still feel that there are areas where we can do a better job of communicating the successes that we're having with our programs, and that's something that we're trying to do in this office and one of our goals for the next year. Another thing is to make sure that we're aligning our systems with post-secondary education. I think that we're doing a great job, but I think that's something that we need to kick into high gear because, as you mentioned before, 67% of the jobs of the future is going to require some post-secondary education, and we have a lot of individuals that can benefit from that. And the closer we align with post-secondary education, the better off we'll be. That has been something that I've seen. Although our community college programs are doing a good job of connecting in-house, that's still an area that can be strengthened. Also making sure that the community-based organizations and the colleges, what does it take, how do we do that, making sure that there is a strong connection. Because there are things that the community colleges just can't do, but by partnering with community-based organizations, I see that that is a huge strength that we can have. And we're one of those systems that, in looking kind of nationally, looking at the state dynamics in each state, we're probably one of a few states that has a huge community-based organization contingency. So we have that opportunity where community-based organizations and school districts and ROEs and community colleges can really work together. I think we can leverage a lot of resources that way. I think we need to do a better job of connecting with our human services partners because we're serving the same population. There may be a few exceptions, but we're serving the same population. So we need to do a better job of connecting and making sure that I understand what the goals are at the state for adult education, but also making sure that our DCEO partners and our local workforce investment boards understand the policies and how we can better connect. One of the things that we've been looking at is how we can braid some of the funding that we have. How can we make sure that if I have a goal, we can help what we're doing in terms of career pathways can actually help our other partners in achieving their goals. Also, better looking at our policies and determining what policies are actually working and what policies may be a hindrance to achieving some of the goals that we've set out to do. Making sure that we are not only aligning our curriculum with our standards and our with Common Core and college readiness standards, but making sure that we're aligning to some of the career and technical education goals and components, making sure that there is that close connection so that we make it a smooth transition for our adult learners to move through the process.
Great, thank you. I wanted to follow up on this issue of braided or blended funding because it's clear from the federal opportunities that nobody's saying there's going to be a huge influx of new funding. But we also know from the input sessions that a lot of organizations already blend and braid funding, but that also means blending the limitations of each source of the funding. But I wonder if you think, or is there a specific federal or state policy change that would actually make any of those funding streams more flexible that we should be kind of looking at as we develop kind of a policy agenda?
That's a very good question. I hope I have a good answer for you. But a few weeks ago, we pulled together some state agencies to really look at braided funding and what we could do in terms of leveraging other resources to continue the good work that's going on with bridge programming and also with some of the integrated accelerating opportunity programs. And so we know that there's not going to be this increase in funding. But what we have to do is take a look at our student population that we're serving and determine what some of the policies are at the other state agencies in terms of receiving funding. There may be a state agency that could pay for an individual that's eligible for their services. They could pay for a class, or they could pay for some support services for an individual. And I think in terms of that, that's what we need to do. In terms of ironing out all of the policy pieces, I think we're at the beginning stages of that. And I think that there will be some policy change across agency. That is something that I hope that can happen if we really take a look and look at all of our policies and determine, well, there's some overlap here, there's some overlap here. How can we kind of blend these policies together that will make for one policy? And Carrie, I'm reminded of our times back in the Shifting Gears initiative where all of the agencies came together to develop that bridge definition, and how good that definition was, and what it has become and how it has evolved over the years. So it has been something that really kind of put us on a level playing field, and I hope that in the future that we can have more policies like that.
Thanks. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that shared really vision and description of what bridge programs are, it's really grounded our work as advocates too, because we've had something to point to and kind of get people around a common conversation. And I actually wonder if you think that there was particular evidence or ideas that really made the difference in getting to that shared definition. So to us, that's kind of one of the main policy outcomes. And so as we think about potentially new policy outcomes at that level, we kind of want to be prepared for sort of the type of evidence we need to put forward to do that. So just reflecting on that, do you think there was any one piece of evidence or message, for example, that worked?
Well, for me, I really think that it was the cooperation that we had amongst all the state agencies and advocacy groups, and everyone. We got a lot of buy-in at local level, state level, agency level in terms of the definition. We brought groups of individuals together, and I think that was the one thing that was really the strength there. We had post-secondary institutions, everyone contributed to this discussion, and everyone came to an agreement. And so that's one of the pieces that I really think is going to be key. And some of the things that we've identified in terms of looking at hopefully I won't get this wrong, but it's the Illinois pathway initiatives that are going on within the state. As much as we can make sure the focus has been on K-12 a little bit more, but I think it's evolving, which is the original intent, is to make sure that it involves everyone. So what we're doing is trying to make sure that adult career pathways are talked about, and really defining what adult career pathways. They can take on a lot of different forms. Individuals that have been out, have a high school diploma but have been out of the college scene or have not entered college and wanting to get back. And then we have our adult learner population that is those without a high school diploma or low basic skills, or our English language learners that are a part of that particular pipeline. What I think we need to do as a state system is we need to strengthen our adult learner involvement or our adult career pathway involvement in those initiatives, and making sure that our voice is there, ensuring that adult learners are an integral part of what needs to take place in our state.
Thanks, and I think we would really agree with that. And in fact, I think if I can interpret some advice from you to us about that, is that the kind of policy priorities or policy agenda that we have, that would be an audience for it. The folks, the leadership of the Illinois Pathways Initiative, that we have made some recommendations.
And I think the more we can strengthen that, Carrie, the better. Around the adult career pathways, and it goes back to something I said before, the communication and what that communication looks like, making sure that we have well-written descriptions of what our adult career pathway, what that means, so that we can be better able to articulate that. That's one of my priorities for this year, is to make sure that we have the communication mechanisms, whether it be online or print materials, but making sure that we can really communicate the message and how effective the bridge programs and the integrated programs are within our state in helping students to make transitions to post-secondary education and into pathway employment.
That's great. I guess I also wanted to see if anybody on the line had a question for you, if that's okay.
That's fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if there's anybody on the line that has a question for Jennifer, just hit *7 to unmute your line.
Yeah, I know Maureen Helwig has a question.
I think, Maureen, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead and ask your question.
Jennifer, I was very glad to hear the discussion about our, defining and recognizing bridge programs. And I'm just wondering, in some conversations I've been having lately with some of the literacy providers, has there been thoughts at ICCB about what I guess some of us are now calling a pre-bridge, when we face the fact that some of our adult learners are reading at the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade level, and we've, of course, defined bridge entry at the 6th grade. So where does that fit into your thinking, and will this be part of, further development discussions of how to work with adult learners?
Definitely, Maureen, thank you for the question. We have thought a lot about making sure that we are not creaming at the top in terms of these career pathway programs. It's my belief, and most of you, I hope, know my background is students, and I used to be an adult education instructor, and so I understand that individuals come in with no reading all the way up to a higher level of reading. So it is our priority to ensure that low-skilled adults are a part of this discussion, and we have developed a framework that looks at the pre-bridge level and what that actually looks like. We haven't worked out all of the different components yet, but we do want to infuse the pre-bridge. Although when we talk about pre-bridge, our learners go lower than that. We want to make sure that we are infusing career awareness within the curriculum. And right now we're holding curriculum institutes throughout the state that have embedded in our standards the career awareness, technology skills, all of those things. Because as they progress and they move to the next level, then we want to make sure that they are not left behind in those discussions, that they are starting to explore different career pathways. So as they reach the area of pre-bridge or bridge programs or integrated models, then they have some concept and some knowledge about moving forward. And I think that is, that's just by design. We wanted to make sure. One of the things I wanted to mention is that as a part of the WIOA legislation, when the state directors got the information, it talked a lot about skills, but it didn't really focus in on basic skills or low-skilled adults. And so one of the things that we wanted to ensure is that low-skilled adults were a part of those discussions and that we're not leaving any student behind. We're not looking at the upper levels. We're looking at all levels because all levels are important. So we were successful in making sure that in the report language and in the guidance that will be provided as a part of the legislation, that ensuring that everyone has access to career pathways, at least those that want to make that decision to move in that direction. We want to be able to provide everyone with those tools in order to do that.
Yeah, I think part of the confusion I'm hearing is for literacy providers being told that they need to start bridge programs when the students they work with aren't even quite ready for what we're now calling a bridge program.
Right.
And
so, I really think that we can do some things at the lower level, but they may not be ready for a bridge at that point because they're either trying to gain their language skills. But I do think that there are things that we can do at the lowest levels that are not bridge programs. But some of the evidence has proved that being in a bridge program or in an integrated model helps individuals to move closely. So I wouldn't rule that out. And as a state agency, I would leave that up to our locals in determining which students are ready to move into a bridge programs and those that need a little bit more of literacy instruction. But they can also start to incorporate those awareness activities within their instruction or within the literacy one-on-one.
It would be helpful to lay out the continuum so that everyone understands where their organization in terms of capacity fits or where they can stretch to that's realistic for the group they're working with. And if we're clear about the differences of those levels, I think that's great, because I think that's what we need, as you said, is the integrated sense of the pathway to a good job starts with reading 101 and moves all the way up into advanced skills training.
Okay. Thank you for that. We will look at that layout of that continuum. I think that's a good idea.
Thanks, Maureen, and thanks, Jennifer. I think there was one other question. Do you want to? Lynn Burkett, did you have a question? You should *7 and unmute your line, and then this will be our last question before we move on.
Hi, this is Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Go ahead.
Hi, okay, great. Hi, Jennifer. One of the things that, it's not a major concern, but it's a slight concern in how, we have to test our students for eligibility, because what we have found in certainly our integrated model especially, is that it may look like we're kind of, creaming that population because the reading levels on a TABE might show up as a 9 or a 10 on, say, a D-level test. And so you'd think, wow, well, how much really further assistance do they need? And what we have found is when we put them in these integrated models and into academic coursework and academic text that, they are just, the TABE may show they're a 10th grade reading level, but boy, we would really challenge that. So I'm not sure, to be honest, what the question is, other than maybe just a cautionary of it isn't necessarily always about a reading or a math score that shows that a student is certainly at risk to complete a program without this kind of intervention, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. There will be other things that will be a part of those discussions, and some of our textbooks, especially, Lynn, as you're talking about the integrated model, some of our textbooks are written higher than a 12th grade level. So it makes it a little difficult. And with our integrated model, that's why that support classes is so important. But there has to be other things there that will help you to make that decision whether that student will be successful in the program, like more of the diagnostic assessments to kind of help to see where they're falling. But
yeah,
also,
that's great. Thank you.
We're going to have to make sure that our assessments are aligned, especially as we're talking about Common Core standards, and that's something that I know the federal government is working on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lynn.
So I unmute, guys.
*6 to
Thank
mute
you.
your line. Thank you for asking. So Jennifer, I really want to thank you for very much for joining us today and taking some time to talk about where we're at in these federal opportunities. And I also just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and the issue of career pathways, and also just your being a willing partner with all of us who are advocates and people in the field to kind of work through some of these somewhat knotty and complicated issues that happen in the field. But I think we're really looking forward to kind of the next phase of this work and kind of working through some of these issues and ensuring access for people who even have the lowest skills. So thank you again.
Thank you, and I look forward to continued work with both of you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Kay.
Okay, so we signaled this element of our conversation today in your registration questions. So we wanted to take a minute and revisit some of the questions we had put out in our registration form, all a part of our plan on how we figure out together how we elevate an adult learner policy agenda. So in the registration we'd asked you, what are some of the key messages, who are effective messengers, and then what are those leverage points? What are the policy levers that would help us advance? So we're actually just going to break that down into 3 polls where you're going to be able to give us, help us prioritize some of those messages right now. So these are ranking polls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just because you vote something a 4 or 5 doesn't mean it gets voted off the island. Just because you rank something 1 or 2 doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be the headline on the policy agenda. But these were some of the themes that we heard from you as far as, who are the most influential messengers for delivering the message to Illinois leaders that Illinois adults are a priority. So the 5 choices are employers and business leaders, elected officials like the governor, elected officials like the mayor, adult learners themselves, hearing from students as messengers, as well as higher education leaders, so folks that work at community colleges and elsewhere. So a few folks have responded. Once you respond, your screen will just say thank you. Sometimes ReadyTalk lets us display the poll results to you, but for some reason they're not going to let me show you the ranking poll. So we'll leave this poll open just for another minute. And this is sort of go with your gut. Who are the most influential messengers for delivering the message to Illinois leaders? All right, I'm going to try to hit the button that says show the results. Let's see if you guys get to see it now. Oh, okay. This one did not want to display a pretty bar graph, but we have, I can see the responses, so I can tell you that people definitely think employers and business are one of the most important voices, followed by higher education leaders, or adult learners themselves. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go in order of who's voting, but we're definitely seeing the business community, learners, and then sort of a mix between elected officials both at the city and state level. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So similar, we asked you in the registration, what are the most strong messages for making adult learners a priority for Illinois' education and employment goals? Some of the responses and themes you offered were the high cost of low literacy and how do we use our agenda to help eliminate poverty, help reduce poverty. Many people also mentioned the importance of growing Illinois' economy, growing our economic strength. In a few different ways, people offered ideas related to future earnings equal future state revenues, and so if we could help people access education and training, secure employment. They will help provide state revenues through taxes in the future. The whole issue of the skills gap and how the jobs of the future will require middle skills and how do we fill this gap. And then a few people also made the connection between if we're investing in adults and parents, that will also benefit their children. So again, nobody's going to get voted off the island, but if it was up to you, how would you rank these various messages? And so we'll just take another minute. And once you hit submit, you'll have a thank you screen. It shows that you've responded. So we'll just give it one more second, and then I'm going to close this poll. Okay. And then our last question for today, our last poll. So what is the most effective policy lever? And that's basically just a fancy term for leverage point. You know, what's that point of leverage where we could influence a person, an opportunity, in order to elevate our messages and prioritize adult learners? So many folks offered different responses. Some of them included elected officials and leveraging our elected officials at the city level, state legislature. A few folks in different ways talked about return on investment data. How do we show the impact of investing in education? People talked about economic development as well as employers. How do we leverage the job producers? A couple of folks talked about how we share stories using social media and other platforms to help elevate the stories of adult student learners. And then the last, a couple of folks mentioned the gubernatorial election specifically, as well as the 2014 fall elections coming up in general. And so trying to see, you know, what do folks think is our best leverage point, the most effective policy lever? All right, so we're just going to let that go for
Social media is the high score.
So again, apologies that you can't see what's coming in. It definitely looks like figuring out ways that we share stories and use social media is ranking a close second with elected officials, and followed by the 2014 elections. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and thank you for your participation. So, you know, Carrie and I were saying we really, yes, Betsy Rubin added in chat, and I hear you. I'm voting with what I think is the most effective, not what I think is the most important. So we hear that. And we do have to figure out, you know, how we move the dial and amplify our messages. So, you know, we over here at Women Employed and the Chicago Jobs Council with the Pathways to Careers Network have really been thinking, well, how can we leverage the 2014 elections? And looking ahead to the gubernatorial campaign, you know, two top-level messages that we drafted were, you know, asking the incoming governor of Illinois to adopt a career pathways framework across Illinois' education and workforce systems. And the second commitment would be to target investments to ensure our workforce has access to and can succeed in proven programs like Bridge, Integrated, and some of the other models we talked about today. So for the remainder of the call, I'm happy to unmute all the phone lines so that we can have a discussion for the remaining, you know, 10-15 minutes. We just have to practice some common courtesy, so if your dog's barking, you're doing dishes, the baby's crying, please hit *6 to mute your lines. But otherwise, with the
conference has been unmuted.
So do folks have any immediate reactions to the top-level messages, adopting a career pathways framework and targeting investments? And then Carrie and I are going to tag team and walk you through what some of those more specific messages would sound like.
Maureen at Erie House again. I really think that first bullet point is really important. And I think that our current governor, should have a campaign message regarding workforce and employers to offset the other candidate who says he doesn't have a social agenda and doesn't seem to think that's important. Not quite sure what he means by social agenda, but if he's including workforce in there, then that would be a serious problem.
Thanks, Maureen. Anyone else have a reaction to either of these messages, sort of high level? Okay, let's just move on to the first one a little bit more specifically. So having a unified career pathways framework that serves all adults. So one for the state, one that works across adult education, and workforce programs. We have been following the different frameworks, or maybe they're similar, that we already have in the state. And so Jennifer did mention the Illinois Pathways Initiative, which has a framework coming out of the programs of study. ICCB within adult education developed a framework for within their own programming. And then the other one that we've looked at is the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways, which is actually a multi-state initiative led by CLASP nationally, and Illinois is one of the states that they're working with. And this is we actually think this is a very good model that could be adopted in Illinois because it describes a pathways framework for an entire state or system. It also describes pathways programs and what those look like within that framework at a local or regional level. And so it actually is isn't just one statement or one graph. It's kind of a whole built-out, robust way of thinking about career pathways that I think gets back to, in some ways, some of the points that, Maureen, you were making earlier about making sure that the different providers and administrators of different funding streams understand kind of where they fit in, and it's inclusive of all adults or people who need to get on and continue on those pathways. So they have proposed criteria and indicators, so you have to get a commitment to a shared vision and strategy amongst partners. So at the state level, that the partners would be the different administrators or state agencies. The shared vision would need to happen at the leader, the governor's level. But at a local level, a shared vision and strategy amongst partners might be local administrators. It might be actually local partners on delivering a program. Resources would get aligned with that framework. There would be policies would have to also align with that framework and support it, so state policy. And then you'd have to measure with data what success looked like. You'd have to use those metrics that they recommend or adapt those metrics and measure and report those outcomes and understand if you're making progress as a state, as a program, as a state agency, for example. So I wonder if there's any kind of thoughts or reactions to this. I understand nobody on the call had a chance to review the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways information, but kind of what do you think about the idea of specifically picking a framework and promoting that Illinois adopt it, and really from the top down, from the governor down?
Well, it ought to make life a lot easier if the politicians and policymakers understood what a career pathway looks like.
Right.
And that it really isn't about adult education in one place and workforce development in another, but that for adult learners in Illinois, it's got to be a continuum. And if we can get that recognized, then everyone should be able to figure out where they fit in with the dollars along that way, and that all parts of that contribute towards someone getting a job and pursuing a career.
Great to have you on the team, Maureen. How do people, so I want to actually go back to the responses to the poll, the very first poll, which was that elected officials and learners are actually some of the best, or I'm sorry, it was employers and learners are some of the best messengers on this, kind of for us. And so I just wonder, I wonder if people have thoughts about how that works when you're calling for a framework. Like maybe in an election year, like how, like what's really going to grab people's attention, or what's the story that could be told?
I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, but it seems to me the reason those two groups were identified, employers and adult learners, is these are the two that are most impacted.
Right.
And I think often policymakers like to separate those two, like, well, there's those poor folks over there, and then there's employers, and those are two different interest groups. In reality, although we don't always, have that awareness, they're absolutely linked. The work pool out there is the folks we work with, and employers need to understand that. Many do, and that's why they're nervous, because they need us to get those folks together, because that's who has to work for them, and they need the skills to do it. But policymakers need to understand that message needs to come in a unified voice from employers and adult learners if we can figure out how to make it happen.
This is Betsy.
Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah.
Just to add on to what Maureen, I'm always thinking about what's going to be effective. And people, like Illinois cares about what employers think. We need employers, we need businesses to keep our economy strong. So that's why they're going to listen to employers. And they need to listen to adult learners because they need to not forget about adult learners. I think it's really important for us to provide statistics and information, about return on investment and so on. But I do think you also have to get to people's hearts so that they can see adult learners are real people, and also to have adult learners talking about successes that they have had because of adult education. I think that that's really important in terms of changing minds.
Absolutely. Amen.
Thanks. I think this idea of co-messengers on, of the successful impact on an employer and an adult learner that sort of shows up as the result of career pathways it could be a really strong message. So without having to get into the details about what a unified career pathways framework is, the point is the impact that career pathways have on the on individuals and employers is kind of what matters. So I think we're going to move on to the next kind of message area we were talking about.
Because we realize it's 1 o'clock, so we want to be respectful of people's time, so we hope that you'll stick around probably just for another few minutes. These are some of the sub-messages under the targeted investment. So if our two big asks for Illinois state leaders is a unified career pathways framework and targeted investments, this is what we mean. It would be providing resources that would allow us to take bridge programs to scale. It would be providing resources for Illinois' 21st Century Workforce Development Fund. And third, it would be fully funding the monetary award program. So this is the financial aid at the college credit level, because if we're really talking about, as many of you have said today, a continuum from our very lowest skilled adults to pre-college and into college level, they've got to be able to afford those programs. So folks can see some of the other messages on the screen, and just as a quick reaction, if people have thoughts or questions to our targeted investment messages, and then after we wrap up this section of the conversation, we'll identify our next steps, and then we'll end today's meeting.
This is Betsy, again from Literacy Works. I don't know where this fits in with the messaging, but I just feel that we need to include somewhere the need for full-time adult education instructors and
Amen.
more than, bare bones administrators, because none of these policies, none of these programs can be implemented. Like, there are all these great models out there, but if you don't have full-time staff able to do this, it's not going to be possible to implement quality programs. So I just feel like somewhere that needs to get into the messaging.
Yep, we're definitely making a note of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Anyone else? Reactions?
I think that bringing bridge programs to scale is absolutely, critical. That's extremely important. But the other side of that is how we're going to do that. And to me, that has got to have a mix at least of both community-based organizations doing bridge programs as well as the city colleges. And I have a sense in my experience that the CBOs do a better job on bridge programs because of the cultural wraparound and support services that were mentioned earlier. And I would like, the colleges to continue to work diligently on the quality of their skills training programs. I can't teach phlebotomy at Erie House with a lab. They don't have it. But that's where the colleges really need to step up. I know they're working on it. I applaud that. But, I would say, people may not agree with me, but I think that the emphasis should be bridge programs in the community and skills training at the city colleges.
Thanks, Maureen. I think one of the, I think that's good input. I think we're also thinking about that it's got to be a flexible approach to bringing bridge programs to scale because of that point you made, but also that's, at the statewide level, that's not, conditions are different in different parts of the state. So, but it's got to be a mix of.
Not every neighborhood has a community organization.
Right. Right.
I just want to make sure that the scaling up doesn't mean just shifting it all over to city colleges, but that the communities are capable of scaling up if, as Betsy says, we're given the resources to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. So any other responses or reactions? I think Betsy's point about making sure our message includes, like, that the targeted investment accrues to the infrastructure we need to do this is really important, because I would add that funding to build and maintain the partnerships that are needed to do these things is also critical. It doesn't just happen.
So just because the webinar is ending does not mean this conversation concludes today. Carrie and I, representing women employed in the Chicago Jobs Council for the Pathways to Careers Network, are going to get together and incorporate the ideas you've offered through the registration and polling process, through our discussion. We've been taking copious notes, thanks to my colleague Chris Warden, who's sitting here writing fast and furiously. So incorporating your ideas with some of our draft messages. This summer, we'll be circulating an agenda to the Pathways to Careers Network members. And then we're also interested in identifying, volunteers, including some folks on the phone today, as well as others in the field, to serve as messengers and to help us figure out ways to elevate our policy agenda, circulate our policy agenda, and recruit others. Whether it's connecting to employer relationships that have been positive, identifying effective students, stories that you think should be shared and told. So I think volunteer is a big, wide opportunity, and we could figure out what the specifics look like. And then, we're just interested if people want to continue in this conversation. We realize that, sometimes our webinars are more text or presentation heavy, going through specific policies or the how-to manual, taking a closer look at lesson plans. We decided to do a webinar because we like adding the visual with the conversation, but if folks also have thoughts, doing an offline conversation, gathering in person depending on the region, or following up with a phone call, I would ask for all of this feedback to come in. I've got a very short survey at the end of today's meeting. And so when I'll stop the meeting, the survey will pop up for you, And then if you can just answer those quick questions, I'll really appreciate it. Thank you, and have a great day.